The day I moved into my ranch just outside the HOA boundary, I thought I'd finally bought peace. But the woman across the dirt road thought otherwise. From her porch to my property line, she began her war with nothing but fury and entitlement. Before I tell you how she met a gate she couldn't open, make sure you stay to the end. It was the kind of ranch you dream about when your bones are tired of neighbors. Just over 20 acres of open Texas land, fenced and quiet, with an aging oak at the entrance like a sentinel. The HOA's jurisdiction ended half a mile down the road, but the woman 2 plots over acted like she still ruled the horizon. I didn't know her name then, but I knew the type. Binoculars on the porch. Lawn trimmed within an inch of its life. A personality shaped by complaint forms and threats of city code. The first time I saw her, I was unloading steel posts for a new gate. My old one was a splintered remnant the previous owner hadn't bothered replacing. Dust rose behind her SUV as she pulled up without invitation, rolled down her window just enough to speak, and demanded to know if I had filed boundary permissions. I told her politely this was outside HOA oversight, and the look she gave me could have frozen cattle. Everything out here falls under our community covenant, she spat, then sped off with a warning glare. That evening, I found tire marks circling the edge of my pasture. Nothing was stolen, but something felt violated, a scent of intrusion in the air. I replaced the posts quicker than planned. I didn't want to provoke her, but I wouldn't be chased. I set the new gate solid, reinforced with blackened steel and a coated lock, not flashy, just firm. I worked until the moon rose behind the hills, casting long shadows on the hard-packed clay. Somewhere in the distance, a porch light flicked on. I didn't look up. 2 days later, a letter arrived, not from the county, not from the city, but from the HOA. Folded and formal, it accused me of unauthorized perimeter modification. I stood on my porch rereading it, the paper trembling from the breeze, not my hand. Their authority ended well before my fence began. But the woman had found a way to extend her reach. She had reported me. I made copies of my deed, circled the boundary, and sent it back with a note, not under your jurisdiction. I sent it certified. The reply came faster than I expected, not by mail this time, but in motion. A man in a golf cart bearing the HOA logo came rolling up my gravel road. He stopped at the gate, stared, and backed away. He didn't try to speak. Just took pictures. His camera clicked as I approached. Private land, I said without raising my voice. He didn't argue, just nodded and rolled back the way he came. I watched the dust trail vanish into the trees. The quiet after that was louder than confrontation. Days passed. Then a week. My gate stood undisturbed, my cattle grazed in peace, and the sunsets were as they should be, slow, wide, and golden. I patched up the fence where coyotes had tested it and planted bluebonnet seeds along the front ditch. It felt like the land was healing, breathing again after years of tension with absentee owners. But peace can make people angry, especially the kind who thrive on control. One morning, I woke to find a citation taped to the fence post. A printed notice from the HOA referencing visual obstructions and unsafe entry installations. There was no authority, no enforcement. Just words dressed in intimidation. I didn't tear it down. I left it flapping in the breeze like a warning flag to anyone who thought paper could override ownership. My lock clicked firm when I shut the gate that evening. The wind carried no birdsong, just the dry rustle of weeds. By the second week, neighbors started looking my way, not all with hostility. Some offered silent nods when they passed, others turned their heads. I didn't blame them. Most lived in quiet compliance, unwilling to rattle the cage they lived in. But I wasn't trying to stir conflict. I just wanted land that was mine, the space to work it, restore it, and protect it without interference from a woman obsessed with lines drawn in ink, not history. Then came the drone. It buzzed low over my house just before dusk, small, black, with a camera that flickered red as it circled. I followed it with binoculars until it retreated toward her property. That night, I installed a jammer. I knew the laws, the boundaries, and my rights. I wasn't the one trespassing. But I had to remind them that I wasn't afraid to protect what I had rightfully earned. Not with anger, just with truth and steel. As I locked the gate that night under a sky full of stars, I looked across the quiet land and felt the weight of resistance. This wasn't about a fence. It wasn't about HOA codes or clean lines on a map. It was about claiming space in a world that tried to fence everything in. And on this patch of earth, outside the rulebook, I had planted something she couldn't reach, a boundary she couldn't breach. 2 weeks after I installed the jammer, the winds changed. Literally and otherwise. A gray front rolled in from the north, pulling a chill through the dry Texas air. The oak leaves rattled in the wind like a warning. I woke up to tire tracks in the mud again, this time not at the perimeter, but closer to the cattle barn. No gates were broken. Nothing stolen. But the message was clear, the fence wasn't enough to keep her out. I checked the trail cams and caught what I expected, headlights sweeping across the rear tree line just past midnight. Whoever it was had cut the engine and rolled in quietly. No license plate, no faces. Just a shape, dark and deliberate, stopping near the eastern post before backing out. I copied the footage and stashed it on a thumb drive. I didn't plan to go to the sheriff yet, but I was done treating this like a game. That same morning, I noticed the HOA had installed a brand new sign just down the road. Private road, residents only, monitored area. Their logo gleamed under a plastic shell, but it wasn't even their jurisdiction. The road was county maintained. I checked twice before buying the land. It was a psychological trick. Nothing legal, just a bold bluff. But bluffs become real when no one challenges them. I drove past the sign and didn't look back. At the general store in town, I caught the side glances. Whispers folded behind coffee cups. A woman near the dairy cooler muttered something about that man from the ranch. Word spreads fast in small towns, even when the soil is dry and the stories aren't. I wasn't an outsider by law, but in their eyes, I was foreign. Not because of where I came from, but because I wouldn't bend. That made me dangerous to people like her. Later that week, the power went out. Just at my place. The breaker wasn't tripped, the lines weren't down. The electric co-op said someone had filed a temporary vacancy on my behalf, paperwork with a forged signature. I filed a report and got it restored, but that night I slept with my boots on and a light by the window. It was no longer just intimidation. It was escalation, slow, precise, and legally clever. I reinforced the gate. Welded steel bracing across the frame, added another layer of coded access. The lock clicked like a vault now, each press of the code pad echoing against the silence like a defiant heartbeat. Across the road, her porch light blinked on and off twice. It might have been coincidence, or it might have been a message. Either way, I stared back through the dark until the light died out. The next morning, a new envelope lay tucked under the gate latch. No postage. Just bold, typed words inside, community demands compliance. No name. No signature. No legal header. I burned it in the fire pit without blinking. But I could feel the pressure building like a storm cloud, not just around me, but across the land itself. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about territory, control, and how much silence a man could endure before it cracked. She began sending people, not HOA board members, but men in polos and clipboards, knocking on fence posts, measuring nothing in particular. They never came through the gate. Just stood outside it like wolves on the edge of a fire line. I watched them from the porch, arms crossed, while my cattle wandered behind me, oblivious. I didn't say a word. I wanted them to see I wasn't moving. That the land had chosen its owner, and it wasn't theirs. One of them returned late one evening, just after sunset. I was fixing a hinge when I heard the crunch of gravel and caught the silhouette in my rear view mirror, standing still, arms down, no clipboard this time. I didn't approach. I just stood up slowly, like a man watering his lawn with a shotgun behind the door. He didn't speak. Just stared for a few seconds too long, then turned and walked back into the dusk. That night, the wind picked up again. Trees groaned, the metal roof creaked, and the air smelled like burnt grass. I sat by the window, looking out past the hills where the stars used to comfort me. But now, even the sky felt watchful. They hadn't broken my gate, not yet. But something was coming. I could feel it in my bones. And I knew one thing with certainty: they were planning to push harder. But I was ready to push back. A storm rolled in before sunset, thick clouds churning over the ranch like dark waves. The air was heavy with static, and the smell of wet dirt clung to the wind. I stood on the porch with my arms crossed, watching as a black SUV pulled up to the gate. 3 men stepped out, umbrellas snapping open, their silhouettes outlined against the distant lightning. I didn't move. The gate stayed shut. I made sure of that. They didn't try to talk, just took photos. Of the lock, the sign, the property line marker. One of them held a tablet and tapped furiously. Another pointed toward the gravel road like he owned it. I recognized the insignia stitched onto his collar, not official law enforcement, but private enforcement. HOA muscle. Legal enough to scare some people, but not me. I stood taller, letting the wind whip around me as thunder cracked over the trees. The next day, a notice appeared in my mailbox. Formal HOA letterhead, bold red stamp across the top, non-compliant boundary obstruction. They were claiming my gate violated community aesthetics. The laugh caught in my throat like a splinter. I didn't even live in their jurisdiction. But they'd filed a complaint with the county, hoping to trigger a review. It was a game of legal harassment, death by 1,000 forms. I spent the next 48 hours digging. Old county maps, subdivision deeds, zoning loopholes. Everything they ignored when they assumed I was another loaner with a fence and a mortgage. But I had something better: the original land agreement from before the HOA was even formed. Tucked in a file stamped 1974, it outlined the easement rights that ended exactly 2 feet before their welcome sign began. That 2 feet was my sword. I made 3 copies of that agreement and hand-delivered one to the county office. Then I scanned and emailed the others, one to the sheriff's department, and one directly to the email address of the HOA's legal rep. No threats, no caps lock. Just facts. Timestamped, notarized, and scanned in full resolution. The kind of paperwork that doesn't scream, it silences. The following morning, I found tire ruts across the edge of my north field, the soft part near the cedar fence. Someone had tried to drive through, then backed off when the mud gave way. That same day, I saw Karen pacing in front of her porch like a general without a war. Her dog barked at the wind. She stood with arms folded, face pale, phone in hand. I could almost hear her fury from across the line. The tension cracked when a construction crew arrived unannounced. 4 trucks. Graders. Surveyors. They lined up along the shared road and claimed they were here to install a community drainage extension. I called the county. No permit. No authorization. No record of any request. It was an ambush, dressed in orange vests and clipboards. But this time, I wasn't the only one watching. Deputy Raines showed up 20 minutes later. Long jaw, mirrored shades, voice like gravel. He didn't say much, just asked for permits. None produced. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, then turned to Karen, who had just arrived, barking something into her phone. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw her hand shaking. When the deputy raised his finger, her voice fell silent. The crew packed up and left by sundown. Karen didn't. She stood beside her car, staring at the gate she couldn't pass, eyes darting between my porch and her HOA packet. I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I just sat on the porch, mug in hand, letting the last of the rain slide off the eaves. Sometimes silence says more than justice ever could. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up to headlights or fear. The storm passed, leaving the earth soaked and silent. The oak trees creaked gently in the breeze. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. But something had shifted. They tested the lines. I held mine. And in the stillness, I could feel it, They were the ones feeling the pressure now. Shame and quiet victory. The courthouse smelled like old varnish and paper, the kind that sticks to your clothes and reminds you that decisions made here last forever. I sat at the end of the long oak bench, deed in hand, boots still dusty from that morning's walk across the ranch. Across from me sat Karen, arms crossed tight, HOA binder bulging with failed paperwork. Her expression was carved in stone. When the judge called our names, the air shifted. A few residents from the HOA board were present, nervously whispering behind her. They expected another show of intimidation, the same tactics they used to scare newer neighbors. But today was different. Today, every page of my file was backed by truth and ink, not fear and fiction. I presented everything: the original survey, the zoning maps, the notarized deed transfer, the historical boundary lines. Each item was handed over clean and steady, no drama, just facts. Karen's attorney tried to interject, citing community disruption and precedent. But the judge cut through it with a quiet nod and a question: "Are they part of your HOA?" Karen didn't answer, she just blinked, jaw twitching. The final ruling was short. My property was legally outside the HOA, immune to their bylaws, assessments, or restrictions. The court formally recognized the easement and gate as valid, and the HOA was barred from further interference. There was no cheer, no applause, just the sound of the gavel tapping once against wood, as if closing the door on a chapter too long drawn out. Outside the courthouse, the sun was brighter than it had been in days. I stood on the steps as Karen descended slowly, her face a storm of disbelief and bitter pride. She didn't speak. I didn't need her to. Her silence told me everything. The power she thought she had was illusion. The gate had done more than keep her out. It had revealed just how little ground she truly stood on. Word spread fast in the neighborhood. The gate wasn't just mine now, it was a symbol. Of boundaries. Of patience. Of standing your ground when pushed. Neighbors I'd never met stopped by to say they'd had their own run-ins, but never dared to fight back. Some just nodded in solidarity as they passed. Others left pies, notes, or old maps of how the town used to be, before the HOA turned lines into fences. Karen stopped coming out as often. The HOA newsletters arrived less frequently. And when they did, the tone had shifted, less barking, more tiptoeing. A quiet retreat disguised as policy updates. The power had cracked, and everyone felt it. The ranch stayed quiet. The gate stayed locked. I repaired the fence where the trucks had rolled through, planted new seed, and let the wildflowers take over the edges. Some mornings I'd stand by the gate with a thermos in hand, watching the fog roll across the hills like a slow tide. The same hills she once tried to claim as her own, now just shadows beyond the line she couldn't cross. One afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No name, just a single typed note inside: "You were right to hold the line. We're sorry we didn't back you sooner." No signature. No return address. But it didn't need one. The walls were shifting quietly, and that was enough. The ranch isn't just land now. It's a reminder. That silence is not weakness. That a gate, when placed right, can hold back more than traffic, it can hold back entitlement. The wind still carries her dog's bark on occasion. But it stops at the gate. And so did she.